Violent clashes in the umbrella revolution. The police cracking down on pro-democracy protesters after students forced government offices to close down. And now the Chinese government says it will have to take resolute action right now. The international hotspot, Hong Kong. Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Peckler in New York. The protests started 2 months ago with blockades and sit-ins, but with no sign of compromise from the government. The students escalated their actions and surrounded a government building. They were beaten back by police and at least 40 were arrested. The demonstrators say they do not want China to interfere in Hong Kong's elections. The BBC's John Sudworth has more now from Hong Kong.
Once again, Hong Kong's protest movement has boiled over into violence. The umbrellas raised against the pepper spray. The truncheons and the running battles marking some of the worst clashes since it all began 2 months ago.
They have used a lot of weapons that make us painful and fear, but actually we do fear. But it deserves, democracy deserves it.
But the truth is many have already left. Protester numbers are down, sometimes to just a few hundred. The students began occupying the streets to try to force Hong Kong's ruling power, China, to amend the new election rules under which it's able to decide which candidates can stand. But Beijing is clearly in no mood for compromise, even taking the rare step of telling a group of British MPs from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, planning to visit Hong Kong on a fact-finding mission, that they would be refused entry. It's important to note that the protests, at least here at the main site, have been overwhelmingly peaceful. But as the protesters now try to up the ante, they are playing a risky game with promises of more resolute action of the kind we saw from the police last night. And now Hong Kong's courts have issued a new injunction, allowing the authorities to clear this area of the protest behind me. And if that is acted on, then of course it could well mark the beginning of the end. Today, Hong Kong's leader issued a warning.
I call on the students who are thinking of returning to the occupation area tonight not to do so. Do not think that the police's tolerance in the past means they are incapable of handling the situation.
But however these protests end, through force or through sheer exhaustion, the students say that while China may have the upper hand, they are prepared for a long fight. John Sudworth, BBC News, Hong Kong.
I want to bring in our international affairs correspondent Hamish McDonald here in New York for the latest on the situation in Hong Kong. And Hamish, is the interference by mainland China into Hong Kong, is this a new phenomenon?
Well, to be honest, it really depends on what your definition of interference is. The reality is, though, that since 1997, when Hong Kong was handed back by the British, there has been what's known as one country, two systems, and that was supposed to allow Hong Kong to have a degree of autonomy, a degree of freedom that was not available to the population in the rest of mainland China. Now, that was supposed to last for 50 years. The only areas in which China would continue to exert its influence on a day-to-day basis anyway is when it comes to the military, to defence and to international affairs. So to all intents and purposes, Hong Kong is free to run itself, albeit with some Chinese or Beijing oversight. But this has all come to a head, obviously, because of the process through which they'll elect their new leadership.
So what exactly are these students demanding?
Well, they want free and fair elections in 2017. That's when the next elections are set down for. Now, there is a degree of autonomy. There is free and fair elections to some extent. Now, the way it has happened in the past and the way it's proposed to happen in the future is that Beijing would essentially put forward a list of approved candidates for the leadership of Hong Kong, this position of chief executive currently held by CY Leung. He's the man that you saw speaking in that press conference earlier, issuing a warning to the protesters. Now, whoever it is that stands for that position next time around needs to be approved by Beijing, and that's what the protesters say they do not want. They want to be able to choose whoever the person is. They want no interference. They want no involvement from Beijing, and that's essentially what this is all about.
Lay out the timeline then for this event then, because they're protesting now, but the elections are not for a bit yet.
Yeah, well, not until 2017, but obviously the process is one that is in motion already. As you know, China is a very big country, and these sorts of decisions happen very slowly. These protesters know that if they want to make change happen, they need to do it now. And that's why there's been these sort of months of rolling protests, albeit the ones that we've seen overnight have been among the bloodiest so far.
Alex Chow, who is the student that organized these first initial protests there, said that the intention was to disrupt the government. Clearly, that's something that Hong Kong and Chinese officials find somewhat threatening, or at least disruptive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has been disruptive. I don't think they've achieved all of their objectives. In fact, some of the student leaders have said that they've failed to do what they set out to do, which was to prevent government from happening at all in the last 24 hours. But certainly they did manage to shut down the office buildings, including some of the parliamentary offices in and around that Admiralty area in Hong Kong for a number of hours. They haven't succeeded in doing that over a longer period of time. But clearly the leadership in Beijing does see this as a significant threat. They do not want popular uprisings to start anywhere, and certainly Hong Kong is a very visible place, partly because of its history, but also because of the fact that there is a degree of freedom there that doesn't exist in other parts of China. So protesters, students who want to gather, have been able to do so in a way that it would be more difficult to do in, for example, Beijing. Of course, everybody remembers the events of Tiananmen Square. That will be first and foremost in the minds of the Chinese leadership in wanting to shut down this lot of protests to prevent it escalating into anything broader in Hong Kong itself, or indeed from escalating into something that happens across the Chinese mainland as well.
So given Hong Kong's existence then and the origin of that, what is the possibility that the UK may actually get involved?
Well, I mean, there's no formal role for the United Kingdom to get involved here. They handed back control of Hong Kong in 1997. But as we heard already, there is this Parliamentary Select Committee on Foreign Affairs that has a role in investigating these sorts of matters. But clearly, they don't necessarily bring any influence to bear on what Beijing chooses to do. In fact, Beijing has said, well, if these politicians wish to come to Hong Kong, we would see that as a confrontational act. Now, these politicians obviously have an interest. There is this legacy of British rule over Hong Kong as a former colony, and clearly there are still many British expatriates as well as expatriates from all over the world working in Hong Kong. It's a major financial centre, a bit like you would find on Wall Street. There are people that come from all corners of the globe to take advantage of the financial circumstances and to work in the financial services industry. So there clearly is a dynamic that exists in Hong Kong that is unique. But certainly the British government has no formal role, has no formal capacity to provide oversight here. But the findings of this Parliamentary Select Committee will be potentially significant. They may be referred onwards. They may lead to some further action potentially at the UN, for example, if the British Parliament wanted to act on whatever their recommendations are. But at this point, those politicians are being barred from entry. So they can't really do much about that.
Hamish, lastly, I wanted to ask you about just the overall nature, the tone, the style, I guess, for these demonstrations that they've changed over the past couple of weeks then. You know, you brought up Tiananmen Square, and obviously that one image of that demonstrator standing in front of that tank is forever seared into our minds then. Has that same type of style, has that same type of opportunity changed, though, since these demonstrations have started?
Well, certainly the tone and style of these demonstrations has evolved, and in fact within the community of demonstrators themselves there is a degree of disunity. There are some that want to take a more aggressive, assertive approach. There are those that say actually we need to really take this to the authorities. We need to put our bodies on the line, as it were, and be prepared to lay our lives down for this cause. There are others who say that actually that is not the tactic that will help us achieve the result that we want. We need to remain peaceful peaceful. We need to remain, for all intents and purposes, silent, because much of this protest has been a quiet one, but it's had these sort of momentary flare-ups at different times. So even within the protest community, there's disunity. I think more broadly as well, it's worth remembering that the Hong Kong community is incredibly hardworking. They understand the importance of the financial services industry to the broader economy, and clearly these sort of indications that the protests are hurting the economics of the territory have meant that many people in the broader community say, actually, we want these protests to end, or if they don't end, at least to remain peaceful. So I think certainly the memory of Tiananmen Square looms large over all of this, particularly from Beijing's point of view. But I think also for these protesters themselves, there's no clear path forward. I think what was significant in that press conference that we heard a little bit of earlier was this statement that the protesters should not mistake the restraint being displayed by the police so far as a sign of weakness. That to me appears to be a warning that if they do continue, if they do stay there, if they do try and take an assertive approach, then they will be shut down fairly promptly. I don't think anyone should make any mistake about what the Chinese authorities are prepared to do to nip this in the bud.
Yeah, not to be thwarted on that. ABC's Hamish McDonald with the latest on the situation in Hong Kong. Hamish, thank you for that.
Good to talk.
Of course, you can keep up with the story in real time by downloading the ABC News app and starring the story for exclusive updates on the go. You've been watching the International Hotspot. I'm Dan Kleffler in New York.